I'm Evan from the Lonely Stoner podcast, and I'm going to be going over UFC Rio, some of the results, who's next for who, in terms of these rankings and matchups. So I'm going to start with Vitor Petrino defeating Thomas Peterson by third round KO. It wasn't that much of an entertaining fight, really. Thomas Peterson was trying to engage in the grappling, maybe trying to tire out Vitor Petrino, but he didn't really have much of a chance. He was getting knocked down, he was getting hurt with punches. But one thing I will say is that Vitor Petrino was entertaining the grappling a little bit too much. I think he needs to understand at heavyweight, it's not very hard to get tired, especially if you've got 250 pounds laying on top of you for multiple minutes. However, he definitely has some potential to be ranked because he's not fat, and that automatically gives him a good chance against everyone who is fat. I mean, look at a guy like Gelton Almeida, another former light heavyweight, who is running through a lot of the heavyweight division because he's not that heavy. He's very athletic, got good grappling, very durable. Not durable so much, but like decent cardio. He's able to just keep putting it on guys and win that way. And Vitor Petrino can definitely be like a striking version of that. But at heavyweight, it's always difficult at heavyweight. But I think he can definitely become ranked. I think he can definitely beat some of those lower echelon heavyweights in the UFC. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to what Vitor Petrino is going to be doing next. In terms of his next fight, I think this is his second fight at heavyweight. So, maybe give him another unranked guy, someone who's been there, sort of done that a little bit. Maybe like, I don't know, give him like a Mick Parkin or something. I think Mick Parkin's ranked, so give him Mick Parkin or something. And then I'll go on to Joel Alvarez defeating Vicente Luque. This fight was very weird because Joel Alvarez hurt Luque's eye with a punch in the first round, I think. And Luque went down and because he thought it was an eye poke, but he got punched in the eye. And then after the review, they just continued to fight, which was weird. In my opinion, if you punch somebody in the face and then they get on the floor and cower away and ask for the fight to be stopped, that's a TKO. That's a TKO in my eyes. Luckily, Joel Alvarez did go on to win. I think if Luque had gone on to get a submission or win, then they would have overturned it to a no contest because that was quite ridiculous. How he punched Luque in the eye, caught him with the thumb knuckle. Luque went down, didn't want to fight anymore because he thought he got eye poked, but he just got punched in the eye. Still a decent performance from Joel Alvarez. Luque's shown that he's still able to take a punch, and he can be fairly competitive with guys who are skillful and athletic and big like Joel Alvarez. However, 30-26 on all scorecards. Vicente Luque's a bit done out here if you're asking me. However, Joel Alvarez, yeah, man, like, I know this guy was at lightweight, but from what I've heard, pretty much he had a big weight issue at lightweight. Not necessarily in being able to make the weight, but just that sort of weight cut is not feasible every single time. So it's probably right that Joel Alvarez is a solid 6'2", 6'3", good striking, good submissions. He can be very, very problematic at welterweight. And for his next fight, just give him Neil Magny. Yeah, we want to see the Magny test. Yeah, give Joel Alvarez Neil Magny. There you go, innit? Simple as that. Davison Figueiredo defeating Montel Jackson by split decision. This was a very boring fight, but what I think allowed Figueiredo to get the edges on the scorecards, not just being Brazilian, but it was the grappling exchanges. Because on the feet, it was pretty much even. Maybe Montel Jackson had a slight advantage because he was using his range quite well to land some shots. However, there was nothing significant going on the feet at all. So I think it really came down to the grappling exchanges, which I would say Figueiredo got the better of with a couple of attempted submissions. He had an arm triangle deep in the second or first round. So yeah, I picked Figueiredo. Happy that he won. Got my pick right. I think I picked Joel Alvarez. I can't remember exactly. Hopefully I did. But yeah, no, Davison Figueiredo, solid performance. We know how good he is, right? Former flyweight champion. Has some very good wins at bantamweight. Has some good, even not bad losses at bantamweight. So, who do I want to see him fight next? I would say a rematch of Corey Sanhagen, but I don't think so. Definitely should be somebody around the top 5. I'm trying to think. I would say like a Cejudo, but due to what's happened recently. I will make another side quest about that, but we can't, unfortunately, give him Henry Cejudo. So if I pull up the bantamweight division, Umar's fighting Mario Batista. I think that's actually quite soon. Piotr Jan's booked. O'Malley, I'm not going to fantasy book O'Malley against anybody because he doesn't seem keen to fight at all. So otherwise, every event I'd just keep saying O'Malley should fight this guy, O'Malley should fight this guy. He should fight somebody at this point. I'm not going to say he should fight a certain person because that's just a bit of a waste. Maybe Song Yadong versus Davidson Figueiredo. That's probably a good one because Umar's booked. He fought Corey recently. Jan's booked. O'Malley's not going to fight. And of course, Merab is a champion. Maybe a guy below him, Marlon Vera, Raymond Sahabi, one of these guys. But yeah, realistically, he should be looking at a Song Yadong, a top 5 guy. Get a win like that, potentially, depending on the circumstances of who else there is, he could be getting a title shot. So, definitely should be looking for a big fight. And then we move on to the main event. Charles Oliveira defeated Mateusz Gamrot by a face crank in the second round. If you saw my side quest, given some predictions for this, then you'd know that I was very 50-50 with this. When somebody gets knocked out as brutally as Charles got knocked out, there's always a part of me that wants to pick the other guy, because in MMA, your career can change so drastically. Just ask Tony Ferguson. However, a guy like Tony Ferguson, he was never really that great in any one area. He was just good everywhere. So nobody was able to really find that specialist area against him to beat him until they did. But a guy like Oliveira, he's never really relied on his physicality, his chin, his durability to win fights, because, as you know, in a lot of his fights, he has been finished, and it's been by TKOs and a couple of submissions here and there. But what we do know is that he has the ability, especially this stage in his lightweight career. We know he has the submissions. Of course, most submissions in UFC history. I think he has the most finishes in UFC history as well, extending his records with this face crank submission. But we knew he had the skills, right? And that's why I flip-flopped and eventually picked Charles Oliveira, because I trusted in his superior skills. And this fight was domination, bell to bell, pretty much. You can tell that Gamrot, he wanted to engage in the grappling, which he did in the first round, I believe. I think he got a single leg and actually took Charles down. But the way Charles was not allowing big ground and pound, was keeping Mateusz tangled up, attempted submissions, keeping his legs, in dangerous positions. It's what Charles Oliveira does, right? And a guy like Gamrot, who's not necessarily a submission specialist or ground and pound specialist on the floor, it's dangerous to play that game, because you're going to be laying in Charles' guard or trying to advance submission. Potentially you're going to get swept or caught up in a submission. And God forbid, if you wind up having your back taken, you might as well write the round off, because we've seen Charles do that to multiple guys, riding the back for a round, or for 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes. Pure domination those rounds are. And it was similar in this fight. The striking, Charles Oliveira fighting how he fights. He fights the same in every fight, moving forward, straight punches, front kicks. If he feels a little bit of pressure, he'll circle out to the centre of the cage, give himself a bit of space, and then carry on moving forward. And that's what he was doing in this fight. Gamrot you could tell that Gamrot sensed the fearlessness in Charles, the fact that he wasn't gun shy, he wasn't affected by his last performance mentally, and that he was going to come into this fight the same old Charles Oliveira. So Mateusz Gamrot started letting off right hook, left hook combinations, landing some decent shots. I mean, they weren't technically that great, or didn't seem to look like they had that much power behind them, but he was throwing big shots, and Charles was dealing with them and kept moving forward. And I think this is the point where Gamrot sort of realised he needed to be the leader, needed to lead in this fight, and that's what pretty much got him finished, because he did that in the second round. I think he took Charles down again, but Charles did have some really nice takedown entries in this fight as well. Some really nice, not just sort of takedowns you see him do, like when he gets somebody in a clinch and then clinch takedowns, like some decent proper takedown entries. But they wind up on the ground. Gamrot gets twisted up. Charles finds the back, and he just decides, I don't need to get under the chin, pretty much. I'm just going to whack my forearm over his chin. I'm going to squeeze as hard as I can and force him to tap, which Gamrot did. Because if you don't tap in those situations, you're going to break something, probably. You're going to break your jaw, dislocate your jaw, break your nose, do something to your neck, all sorts of things. So he had to tap. And it's not a bad loss losing to Oliveira, but I feel like Oliveira's kind of shown us that Gamrot isn't in those upper echelons of the lightweight division. So who's next for Gamrot? Probably a guy in that 10 to 15 range. Lightweight's a bit weird because so many of them aren't booked. But if you ask me, we look at Gamrot. He could fight Fiziev. When Fiziev's ready to come back, they can run that back. Because I think Fiziev broke his foot in their first match. So yeah, no, I think that's definitely what we should be running back. Gamrot versus Fiziev, I like that one. Because Fiziev was supposed to fight here as well. So it would be quite fitting. And what's next for Charles Oliveira? Now, that's a very good question because he called out Max Holloway. And Max Holloway responded saying, "I'm down, brother." So it looks like this question answers itself. Really, we're going to be having Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira. Of course, this fight did happen like 8 years ago. No, way further back than that. Probably like 2016 or something. Like around 10 years ago. But this was a very different Charles Oliveira, right? This was a Charles Oliveira that was seen as a quitter, that people thought would never get near a title. And anytime he'd come up against any sort of adversity, he would find a way out of the fight, which is what people said about his fight with Holloway, where he seemed to have got some esophagus injury, I think it was. Apparently this injury was very legit from what I've heard, so I ain't going to question it. But he got some sort of injury, couldn't fight anymore, and then that was it. But not only was that not the Oliveira that we have today, but also it was at featherweight, and it was a long time ago. So I think we need to see that again. It'll be a great fight, and they're both coming off very, very good wins. And potentially, the winner could be lining themselves up for a title shot, depending on what happens with that. Depending on what happens with Gaethje and Arman and Paddy. But the winner of that could be lining himself up for a title shot or a big number one contender fight. Arguably, if Max wins, he gets a title shot, because even though he fought Ilya not long ago, it was for the 145 title. And I'd say if he were to beat Charles, he would have more than earned his title shot at 155. And I think that out of the rematches Ilya could have, I believe that Holloway probably would give him the toughest rematch. I'd still pick Ilya though. But that's about it. That was a little recap post-mortem UFC Rio. I've been Evan from the Lone Stoner Podcast. Peace.